Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me for episode 11 of Friday Book Bites. And today I am joined by international best-selling author Kelly Rimmer. Hi Kelly, thank you so
Hello,
much for joining me.
no, my pleasure.
It's a cold, wet day here in Sydney. How is it up your way?
Well, I don't know if you can see, but it's been sleeting, and to, outside my window, it's just like drenched and icy and miserable. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad we're in the same boat then. Let's see if we can brighten up each other's day. Today, we're talking about brainstorming and thought work. And this is on the back of a Facebook post that I saw of yours. I think it was last week, where you were out cavorting with nature and um, and talking about how that's your brainstorming and thought work session. And what I wanted to ask you to start with, what is thought work for the people out there who don't know, and why is it so important before we start writing?
For me, I'm kind of an obsessive plotter. So before I'm writing even the first word of the book, I have quite an extensive outline written. And so before I write the extensive outline, I need to have been in the story and, understand who the characters are and how things are going to unfold and what the world looks like. And so in terms of thought work, for me, that looks like doing other things. So, in the case of that Facebook post, I was out at a waterfall. I just went for a bushwalk with my dog, and we sat at the waterfall and just did nothing for a little while. But often it's, you have. I actually, I'm rewatching 30 Rock. That's my pandemic kind of comfort food at the moment. And there's an episode called The Shower Principle. And Jack is talking to Liz about how when you're in the shower, you have the best ideas because you're busy doing something else and kind of some parts of your brain are distracted. So your subconscious can get to work and, do the really deep work. And it's true if it was on 30 Rock. But
Absolutely.
it's very much my experience is if I want to really connect ideas, and particularly in these early stages where I'm kind of meditating on a concept, I can't do that at my computer. In fact, that's the only place I can't do it. I can do it anywhere else, but not at the computer.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that really interesting because you say you're a meticulous planner and thought work is incredibly important to you. I'm the other end of the spectrum. I'm a total pantser. And I find thought work really important too. And it looks like we're doing nothing. My husband would be like, "What are you doing?" I'm thinking, I'm marinating. And he doesn't see that as work. But it is such an important part of our process.
Absolutely. And I really think that's a part of the journey of like learning to understand yourself is I sometimes get really frustrated with myself. Like, what am I actually doing? I want to send this off to my editor, but it's not coming together. And all I'm doing is walking around looking at trees or reorganizing my daughter's wardrobe, But I think you have to give yourself a bit of grace because it is such a distractible world. There is so much else to think about. And I actually find, for me anyway, I cannot do that kind of thought work if I am listening to a podcast or watching 30 Rock. It has to be time when I'm focused on something else. All of my brain is busy doing something else. And as someone who loves audiobooks and podcasts, I'm really tempted to, this morning I was walking the dogs and I was like, oh, my Friday podcasts have landed. I'm like, no, Kelly, don't do it. Use this time for thinking instead of consuming.
Yeah, and you're so right. It is that switching off. I find when I'm doing something like the washing or the ironing, which I hate to do, I'm in the middle of editing. People who've been following me for a while know that I'm editing next year's book at the moment, and something wasn't quite working with it. And it was when I was at netball training a couple of weeks ago, watching my daughter's netball training session, and I had that light bulb moment of the thread that I thought will actually bring it together. So
Yep. Yep. I was stuck on the book that I've been thinking about for weeks this week. And I've done all the right things in terms of what I know works for me. I've done a bit of reading about the subject and I've spent a lot of time kind of pondering it. And I just was stuck. I kind of had the first half of the book in my head and I knew how it was going to resolve, but there was this big gap in the middle and I was getting so frustrated. I was becoming impossible to live with, to be honest with you. And I think I was venting to a friend about how it just won't come, and she said, well, why don't you tell me about the story and I'll see if I can help you. Lisa Island, by the way. And I blathered on to her for like an hour of like, this is, it's going to open here and this is going to happen, and then nothing, and then this is how it's going to end. And she like just gave me one idea. She said, oh, what about this? And it turns out that idea comes from, because the place I'm going to be setting the book is a real place, and we'd probably heard about this dramatic event that happened there in a different time period. But that one idea, even if I don't use it exactly, it just reshaped my thinking a little bit, because I had become so focused on the plot, I actually kind of forgot that I set out to write about a particular character. And when she said that, I realized, no, what I need this character to do is follow the arc I'd planned for her, which resolved all my plot issues. So sometimes if you get too caught up in your head, you have to shout out for help.
Absolutely. Leanne's left a comment that I think is very true, that everyone has a different way of doing their thought work. Yeah, absolutely, Leanne. The same as that no writer has the same process. We think differently. We unlock those secrets differently. Yeah, for sure.
And I don't think there's any wrong way. I think like it doesn't really matter. Whatever works for you. It's a bit like parenting, really. Unless you're very far extremes at either end, there's anything in the middle is fine. Whatever works, especially when you're under. Like we were just talking actually before we came on air about how hard it is to be creative when there's so much else going on to worry about. And I think during this period, you just have to understand yourself, and you have to be graceful towards yourself. You know, it's tough.
It is tough. It is tough. Before we go any further, because otherwise I will forget, I do have a giveaway for today's sessions for anyone that asks a question or leaves a comment, whether that's now live or over the next 24 hours. I'll just pop that up on screen so we can see it. And that is a copy of the B format of Kelly's The Things We Cannot Say and of my The Cottage at Rosella Cove. So make sure you do ask a question or leave a comment and you go into the running to win that. Now, there's one thing that I don't know if it's the same for you, Kelly. I often get asked by people, and that is where our ideas come from. It's probably not the most common question that I get asked around the traps. And before we delve into that, I just wanted to share a quote that I stumbled on about 2 years ago, I think it was, you know, when I was doing my thought work cruising the internet. And that's valid thought work. It's absolutely valid thought work. And this is the quote here, that everybody walks past 1,000 story ideas every day. The good writers are the ones who see 5 or 6 of them. Most people don't see any. And I really love this quote when it comes to where authors get their ideas from. Is this something that you have found in your journey?
Yeah, and I think when you're creatively blocked, it's generally not that there's nothing there to find. It's just that you're either not looking in the right place or you're not letting yourself look. I think that's so true. I mean, life is so diverse and rich, isn't it? Even in the good times and the bad times, there's so much to explore. Even like when I've written 2 books now set during World War II, and during the research for the most recent one, I felt like every page I turned in the reference books I was looking at, I was finding more stories. And so I was writing this like running list of possible future book ideas, you know, or just because there's just so much to write about, and you could never kind of reach the bottom of the ideas well when you're reading that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and do you find that sometimes when you're out and about, ideas will just come to you from what you've seen out in the world as well? Because I find that a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes it's little things, don't you think? Like you'll see a particular trait, or someone will say something, and it'll trigger just, I might use that in a character later on. It's not that you're basing the character on the person, but something about their mannerisms or their appearance or a story or an anecdote that they tell, you just tuck away. Like I actually work with a woman who told me about her son, who is brilliant. And when he was stuck on a problem, he was quite a gifted pianist. And so he would go and teach himself, I guess the same thing we're talking about with, you know, doing busy work to distract your brain so your brain can do the deep work. So he would go learn these incredibly hard piano pieces. And that stuck with me for years and years and years. And then one day I was writing a book, and I had a brilliant character who had to work through some problems. And so he was learning difficult piano pieces I emailed her and said, I've stolen your son's character trait. it's 2 lines in my 140,000 word book. I hope you don't mind. But that's how we make the characters three-dimensional, and I guess how we make the plots realistic is you're looking at life and you're stealing little snippets to weave into something else later.
Yeah. Cassie has actually asked a question that was going to be my follow-up to this. So thank you, Cassie. It's Cassie Hamer. And that is, once we've had these ideas, how does that become a novel? How do we know it's a good idea that we want to run with?
How do you know? What's your technique for that? That's a really tricky one.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a technique as such, but for me, it's the ideas that won't leave me alone. You know, I have all these ideas, you know, maybe something I've seen in the street or watched on telly, or a lyric from a song line that might spark an idea. But quite often those ideas don't stick. And for me, it's the ones that won't let me go. And I like to use the example of when I was writing the Kookaburra Creek Cafe. Well, before I was writing the Kookaburra Creek Cafe, I was actually writing a different manuscript altogether. But Hattie was in my brain and she would not leave me alone. And so this old woman standing in the middle of a ramshackle building, every time I sat down to write my other manuscript, she would come into my brain and she'd be like, excuse me, pay attention to me. And I'd be like, go away, just leave me alone. I'm trying to write something else. And the fact that she wouldn't leave me alone, and I know this makes me sound like I should be locked up in an asylum somewhere, but she wouldn't leave me alone. And so I thought, okay, I finally gave in to her and said, all right, crazy old lady, what is it that you want to tell me? And Kookaburra Creek Cafe was born from that. So for me, it's the ones that stay in my head and won't leave me alone.
Yeah, I think I guess I'm kind of the same. Like there are some ideas that just burst at you, and you know they really do nag at you until you commit to writing them. But I've been lucky for the most part. I've really only been stuck for an idea for the next book once, and that was an incredibly frustrating period. But most of the time I have lots of ideas that are potential, you know, saying you're getting ideas from different places, and like I've always got a scribbled down list of, oh, maybe it could be about one sentence, you know. And I feel like I'm quite lucky in that I've got an agent who's very good at helping me figure out which ones are the better idea, you know, because there's no bad ideas necessarily, but there are some ideas which are probably going to be more unique or, you know, better for some reason or another. And I mean, I guess writing commercial fiction, I also try to be practical. Like I pitched a book to an editor and he said to me, that would be a great book. I would read it, but I can't sell it. And I thought, well, you know, I'm writing commercial fiction, so I want to write about things that people want to read about. Not that you're chasing trends, but you know, I know I'm writing within a genre, so I'm trying to make sure that and so it's a collaborative process. I'll go to my agent and I'll say, oh, what about these 3 ideas? They'll say, sure, not for now, or you know, whatever. And the same with my editor. But then sometimes there's an idea that just does not let you go, and so sometimes you have to advocate for the idea when you do it. You know, so there's a couple of different. And for me, I can't generally judge. It's really funny. I have an idea and I might get excited about it, and then I'll talk to my agent about it and be like, oh.
Thanks.
Thanks. And so it's good because I get really enthused about things. So it's good to have someone who can help me, you know, critically assess whether or not what I'm planning to write is actually going to be a satisfying book. So I think I'm actually quite bad at this. There's my short answer. Cassie, I don't know. I need help.
Have you ever got to a point where you've started on an idea and it just hasn't had the legs to carry an entire novel?
Yes and no. So I've thrown away complete manuscripts, like to I think an unusual extent. Lots of writers do that at least once, and I think when you're first starting out, if someone says to you, you have to be prepared to throw out 30,000 words or 100,000 words if it's not working, or set it aside and come back to it. And so particularly before I was published, that was kind of my thing. I'd write, edit, delete, write, edit, delete, because I was really anxious about people reading and what I was writing and assuming it wasn't any good. But now I think because of the way I plot, by the time I write the first word, my agent has reviewed it, my editor has reviewed it. We all agree that it's going in the right direction. So I don't really get stuck in the same way. With my first few books that were published, the edits were really intense, and sometimes I would write these long rambling sections that didn't have anything to do with the ultimate plot, and they would have to come out. But now that I'm plotting more, that works so much better for me. So I think as much as I'm an incredibly inefficient writer who will go off and research for days about things that don't even end up in the book, I think my actual writing process, just because of the way it's all up front, it is a little bit more efficient than what I used to do.
That's probably where you have the advantage over me as somebody who doesn't, plot or plan anything. I can sometimes start things and they just don't go anywhere.
You get the joy of discovering it as you go along, and I'm quite envious of that
true.
because to get to a point and go, because all that thought work you're doing in the back of your brain's made some connection that you weren't expecting. I don't get to do that the way I write, so I'm really jealous of writers who can just fly by the seat of their pants and let it unfold. That seems a bit more magical.
As you said before, whatever works for us as individuals. Cheryl says it's a great way of sitting out the ideas, because if they won't leave us alone, it won't leave our readers alone. I think that's a really important point. And she's mentioned Gigi, who's a character in the Banksia Bay Beach Shack. And an interesting point about Gigi is she was actually a character in the Kookaburra Creek Cafe in the very first draft that I did of that, a very minor, like one-page character, and she got cut, and I didn't want to let her go, and so she became a different character in a different novel. Which it just shows how flexible we have to be, in our characters and our plots, and sometimes even though it might not be right for that novel, it may turn up in another novel.
Yeah. That's why I always say no word you write is ever wasted. Even if you don't use it, you can learn from it, but often you can, whatever didn't work 2 years ago might work now because you've learned a bit more about something, or it's a different context.
Exactly. Now I'm going to take a break from talking about books for just 2 seconds, because Debbie's got a cheeky little comment for you, Kelly. She wants to know if that's mist rolling in behind you, or do you need a cleaner?
I'll be honest, there's two things going on here. I'm renovating the tiny home that is my office. And so there's film on the door windows. Then there's mist happening outside this window, and I haven't cleaned anything for a long time. So, actually that's 3 things, isn't it? It's all of the above.
I think that's a perfectly good excuse.
It's very atmospheric. My next novel is going to be gothic. One of those like eerie on the cliffs kind of.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. This is all part of your professional process. The boys from Happy Valley want to know if you're writing a current book, does something spark an idea for the next or future books? Have you had that happen, Kelly?
Yeah, well, from that research for the book I've just finished, I reckon I could write 10 books out of the ideas I had, all kind of around Warsaw and World War II and the occupation and the communist years. I'll definitely write at least one more book just from the research there.
Yeah, right.
Probably it's not next book, but probably the one after that, so maybe 2023. And what about you? I know Gigi's come back, popped up again and become the star of the show. Have you had that happen in other times?
I haven't had it happen in other times, but like you, when I've been doing research, something might spark an idea there, and I make sure I write that down. I've got a notebook, like I'm sure most authors do have, to pop that down, and then I go back and revisit it later and think, okay, does that have legs or does it not? So yeah, because you never know what these ideas are going to grow into once we give them that space to breathe. So yeah. Leanne says it sounds like you've got good ideas so far. So yeah, so far your process is working. I would absolutely agree on that. Cassie wants to know what your plotting method actually is, Kelly.
So I will have an idea, and I generally, you've got a concept or a character or whatever it is, so that last book, I'm writing a standalone book that connects to one of my earlier books, one of the minor characters from the earlier book. is again the star of the show, and so I knew loosely how her story would unfold. I knew it would be set during Poland in the occupation, and then immediately after it, I wanted to write about the early communist years in Poland. So I had that idea, and it was that loose. And then I did a little bit of reading, and then thought about. I knew, because it's historical fiction, I knew I was going to hit certain real life historical events.
Sure.
So I kind of looked at what was happening in Warsaw during that period and thought, how does this relate to her? Where would she have been during this? What would she have seen? And then from there, this other character popped out at me, and that is Sergius, who is her, I guess, her love interest. And so then I was researching his story. And then so I had the idea becomes less loose over time. Maybe this is over a period of a month or, I don't know, a few months. And then I sit down and I write the outline. And in this case, that outline was 14 pages long. So let's just take a minute and feel sorry for my editor. She actually said to me, when I was in Canada earlier this year, she said to me, there are some authors I have, when they send me a pitch, I know I need to send it to the printer before I try and read it, and you're one of them. So I write, this is what's going to happen in the open scene. And I might put a bit about the character arcs in there. So, Amelia's in Warsaw and she's been through this and it's affected her this way. And then I just break it down into parts and basically write a sentence or two from most things in the book, which then go over the scrivener and make they become scribblings. And then I just expand them and out pops the book. I mean, it's obviously not that easy, but that's
out pops the book. If only it was that easy, right? Oh dear. But then we wouldn't enjoy it as much if it was that easy. Part of the joy of the writing is the pain that comes with it. I think that pouring our heart and soul into those pages, that makes it all worthwhile in the end. So yeah. Tracy is enjoying Startup in the City series at the moment. Are there going to be any more?
Well, good question. I've been happily bombarded by people on social media asking me if Mitchell from the last book in that series was going to get a book, and I'm actually writing a new series now. So Mitchell is the second hero in the new series, so it's a while away. I think it's probably end of next year before his book will come out, and it kind of ties into that series, but it is a new standalone series, and it doesn't have a title yet. So I can't. The first book will be called Letting Go of You. Doesn't have a release date, sometime next year, and some other series title. That's all I can tell you. But I really love writing romance. I think it's such a great, for me, 2 books at once really work, especially when I'm writing about the Warsaw Ghetto, and it's so heavy and so hard and there's so much research. To be able to flip over another manuscript where I know things are going to work out okay for the characters is so good for me. It just makes me so much more level.
A little bit of mental health.
Escapism is the writer, yeah.
So when you talk about Mitchell, why does he deserve his own series, I guess?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wrote in the last book in that series, there's this platonic friendship between 2 30-somethings, and they are both quite similar, and I wanted to actually purposefully, I wanted to write about a man and a woman who are friends and just friends, even though they're because it's something that you sometimes don't see represented that much in books or even movies or whatever. And so, but he's a writer. He's a romance writer, actually, although he's quite secretive about it. So throughout the book, he's doing different things with throughout that book in the last series. He's doing different things with the publishing world, but keeping his identity a secret. And I have this quite specific, his story's already plotted out. I know exactly how it's going to unfold. And it's quite a specific and I think quite a unique kind of structure for a romance novel. So I've just started writing it, actually. So watch this space. It's a while away, though. I'm sorry.
Well, Tracy's certainly looking forward to it. It's interesting how a particular character that was never meant to be a main character can grab us. I know in Banksia Bay Beach Shack, Yvonne, who drives the bus that's on the front of the book cover, she was only supposed to be a teeny tiny minor character, but she kind of became much more when I was writing it. And it's interesting how these characters can stay with us. And Cheryl's got a comment here about Heath. Heath's another character from Banksia Bay, and she's saying that he really stayed with her. It's nice when those characters I guess, become real to us. And Mitchell's obviously got his own life now that you're going to explore with that, which is really lovely. Debbie would like to know who your favourite authors are to read in any particular genre.
Good question. The reason I write women's fiction is Jodi Picoult. So I think she's just remarkable. She's built a remarkable career and she writes remarkable stories. And even my least favorite of her books are still some of my favorite books. So that's pretty fantastic. When she has a new book out, I block the day out in my calendar and read it on release date. I'm such a fangirl of hers. I love Kristen Hanna. I really like Liane Moriarty. Everyone loves Liane Moriarty, but I also really, really love Sally Hepworth's books. Her domestic suspense are just out of this world. I love, you probably have, but if you haven't read Lisa Island's Secret Life of Shirley Sullivan, that's one
of my pile. Yep.
It's so good. You're going to love it. And she's actually, I think sometimes particularly in women's fiction, you have like there's certain things that pop out all the time, and you get these kind of, any protagonist could be any other protagonist in any other book, but I think Lisa has such a different way of writing and such a great voice that she just kind of skips around some of the stereotypes and tropes that we overuse in the genre, and that's why I really love that book. It is fantastic. I've just read recently Amy Meyerson's The Imperfects. She is amazing. I don't know, is that enough? That's quite a lot.
That's quite a lot.
I can do this all day. Get a cuppa, I'll keep going.
Jodi would like to know, did you always set out to write historical fiction?
Nope. I didn't. I know how this happened. No, I do know how this happened. I wrote, my first published book was contemporary. And then I wanted to write about forced adoption. I'd never heard of it. And then the whole national apology, and it was in the media, and Julia Gillard, and everyone was talking about it. And I was like, how did this happen so recently? And I don't know anything about it. And I was kind of shamed by my ignorance. And so I wrote a book about forced adoption, and never wanted to write a historical book, or never had any intention of doing so. And that book obviously had to be part of it set some time ago. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed the challenge of, it's kind of in a way like writing sci-fi if someone else has made the world. Do you know what I mean? Because you've got to set the scene in such a different way. But in this case, the rules are already written for you. The 70s happened, and people will read your book who lived through them. And particularly I like to write against real historical events. And so you've got this immense responsibility and immense challenge of trying to capture something of people's experience. And I think I got a bit addicted to that, because it's not that I won't write a contemporary again, because I really love issue kind of driven fiction, things like juicy things like humanizing people that we've forgotten to think of as people in society. I love that as well. But I don't know, something about historical fiction that is just so hard, but so rewarding.
Yeah, it's definitely a genre I love to read, and I think it is just that exploring eras that maybe we didn't live through ourselves, and what it must have been like, and how very similar some of the issues are that we face today. That old adage, history repeats. It really does, doesn't it? You'd think we would learn, but we don't seem to. So.
No, we don't. And I wonder actually, because when you're writing about another era, it's really easy to see how it's like, how did people not realize where Nazism was headed? Well, people didn't realize it because it didn't start with concentration camps. It started with all of these other really subtle things, and it builds over time. So when you're living in the era, you can miss the subtlety. I mean, there's warning signs all around us in the world, and we can miss it because we're looking at now. And so it's really fascinating to keep, because I keep striking all of these parallels. My book this year, The Truths I Never Told You, it deals with women's rights and women's autonomy, if that's the one, and these issues still today, and even the inequality that I kind of explore in that book, it's changed a bit, but not enough.
Yeah. I also wonder if there's an element, when you said as well, when you're living through it, you don't see the warning signs. I also wonder if there's an element of it can't possibly happen.
Oh, yes, for sure.
And then it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's definitely signs of that in the world right now, of things that we never thought could happen that have happened in our current time. Cassie says you're an incredibly productive writer. How does your daily schedule look?
You know, you would think doing, well, because I generally do at least 2 books a year, you would think I would have a structure. It's chaos here, Cassie. Honestly, it's a hot mess. When I'm in the first draft, I just want to write. I'm the worst wife and mother. The dogs need grooming. I don't do the windows. You know, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And then, so for example, I've been waiting for my edits for a while now, and I'm thinking about the next book. But if you were to ask me what words I had written in that period, what I have written is an outline. Like I've written a little bit of the romance that I'm tinkering with, but I'm not a daily word count person. But sometimes I'll have incredibly productive days. I dictate as well as type. So there'll be days when I'll just write for hours and hours and hours and have lots and lots and lots of words. And then other days when I really am just pottering around, looking like I'm not working at all. So
that's the thought work. That's the thought work.
Thought work, I know, and it's okay. Like I keep saying, you need to be graceful to yourself, but at the same time, I don't really have a structure. So I just write when it's happening. I guess it's not very good. I don't recommend it.
But it obviously works for you. That's obviously how, because you are very productive and very, very successful. So what you're doing is working for you. So yeah, you don't need to change it.
I haven't changed it because I feel like I really feel like I'm in the groove with my outlining process. It's worked now. I'm working on book 11 and book 12. So they're the 2 books I'm about to start editing, and so over time you refine it and things like that. So you do learn to figure out what works for you. So I don't like to tinker with it too much. However, sometimes when I'm like under the pump with a deadline, or the pandemic breaks out in the middle of the writing process, and I think, man, if I had done 1,000 words a day over that early period or whatever, then I'd be so much further ahead now. So yeah, it is actually a frustration. If I could change it, I would, but like I said, I'm too scared to.
Well, and there's absolutely no need to. And Claudine says it's fascinating to hear how different each life is.
Sandy, the last time I had dinner out with friends was with Claudine and Anna Loda and Pamela in Cronulla, kind of right at the start of the pandemic. So Claudine's got a special place in my heart. I feel like she's the last friend I sat down with to chat with.
And she's a gorgeous friend to have too.
It was the best night ever. It was so good. What a way to go out.
Now we've got a question from Chrissy and a question from Leanne, and they're virtually the same question, so I'll pop them both up. But they want to know how long it takes to write a historical as opposed to a romance.
Oh, much, much longer, because the research is so, and I particularly writing about World War II, and particularly writing about some of the stories I've been doing the last few years. Every little detail matters, and so the research can take a really long time. Whereas with romance, because I'm writing contemporary romance, I don't need to figure out, what the dining table might have looked like, or whether or not people wore pajamas. Like I can just write. It's in our world. So I reckon for a story like Mitch's that I've already plotted out and I've kind of done the thought work and lived in the world, if I had a good uninterrupted month or 6 weeks, I could write a reasonable draft. With a historical, probably more like for that same. And also the other factor is my historical is much longer. So, in terms of pure, because you've got to set the world. In terms of pure word count, probably my romances are probably 80,000 words and my historicals are probably closer to 120, 130, 140. So, yeah, it's a much, much longer process.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I am conscious of keeping you too long here, Kelly. I know that we could talk for days and days on end without stopping. We may lose a few people along the way if we did, though. So I'm just going to pop up Kelly's details for people. If you want to find Kelly online, there's her website, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if there's any last questions, get them in now before we say goodbye. So you've got Mitch's story coming up next. What else is next for you, Kelly?
Yes, so my new series, my new romance series, he's actually the second character. The first one has a bit of my background was IT before I was writing full-time, and the Startup in the City series is set around a software firm. And there was one more IT-related idea, and that'll be the first book in the new romance series. And then after that, I'm never writing about IT again, because really I don't know what I'm doing now. I've been writing full-time for 5 years. I have to get my son to turn the TV on. It's all gone. And my next historical, it doesn't actually have a title yet, but it'll be out in May next year in Australia. And it's all historical for the first time. I don't have a contemporary storyline in there. It all takes place during the war. And it is, like I said, Amelia from The Things We Cannot Say is the protagonist of that book. What about you? When's this book that you're editing at the moment coming out?
Yeah, so March or April next year it's due to come out. Schedules are a little bit fluid at the moment because of what's happened with COVID, and they've had to, shuffle a few authors in the schedule. So, but around that March, April next year, assuming that this draft that I hand in at the end of the month is, half decent, and they don't say, you write the whole thing. Not.
Cross my fingers for you.
It'll be fine. It will be fine, won't it, Kelly?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Thank you.
Promise,
it's
going to be fine.
I'm going to hold you to that. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kelly. It's been a blast to talk to you. As I said, we could talk for hours and hours, but that's probably not fair on anyone. So we will wrap it up. I hope you have a lovely weekend.
You too.
And good luck with all the editing and the writing. And we'll see. Claudine's assuring me as well that it'll be okay. So
two of us promising now. I don't know what you're worried about. As if Claudine and I don't know what we're talking about.
Now, I'm actually going to hold all three of you personally responsible.
Oh, look. It's a secure thing. Now you've got three.
If my editor comes back and says, no, Sandy, this is still shy, I'm going to blame all three of you.
Fair enough.
All righty. I'm going to let you go now. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Have a good day.
If anyone thinks of any questions that they haven't asked already, pop them in. Kelly and I will pop in over the weekend and see if there's any new questions there. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a lovely weekend.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.